Barry to do a roll call, please.
Member Bartlesmeyer,
Here.
Member Boykin, Member Sturman,
Here.
Member Holthouse. Thank you. Member Berger.
Here.
Thank you. Member Patton.
Here.
Member Braman.
Here.
Member Donaldson. Councilmember Brost. Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino. Councilmember Rambo. Councilmember Hopper.
Here.
And Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Well, thank you all. And again, thank you all for being here tonight. We certainly appreciate it. I generally don't like to start out meetings with apologies, but as you know, most of the information we needed for tonight's meeting wasn't delivered to you to a very short period of time ago. And that's the responsibility of the department. So I just want to apologize. I'm sure many of you know we're slightly shorthanded and we're trying to do as much as we can with the least amount of staff right now. So we appreciate your patience, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're in our hiring process, so hopefully soon you'll get it in ample time to spend as much time as you want. With that, tonight I'd like to have an election of a chair or co-chairs. Before I describe the process for that, I do want to make note that when the task force started, Dr. Remy thought it was important that there be co-chairs, one representing the elected officials, those on city council, and then another representing the citizen members that have been appointed by city council. And certainly that's an option for consideration by the task force. Or there could be a single chair, depending on the inclination of the task force members. In terms of process, what we'd like to do tonight is accept nominations from the floor. And then that will be done by a motion. And we'll accept as many nominations as there are. The first nomination will be voted on. And if there's a majority, then that person or persons is the chair. And I'll leave you all alone for as much of the meeting, the remaining part of the meeting as possible. If that person or persons do not get a majority, then we'll move to the second nomination and do the same process over until we have a majority vote on a chair or co-chairs. So before I call for motions, are there any questions that anyone has regarding the process? So members of the task force, who would like to make a nomination for a chair or co-chairs? Did I tell you about the pay?
So I was actually I was going to nominate Carol as a chair or a co-chair. I am in agreement with Dr. Remy and how we've set this stuff up. I think it is important to have voices from two different places, but I know that as we go forward with this stuff, I think that the education side and getting people on board with what is going on with us is going to be important. And as Carol has kind of helmed that here from mostly from the beginning, that would be the next logical step to me.
So we have a nomination of Ms. Holthouse as chair. Although I read through Mr. Farmer's discussion that he might prefer a co-chair situation, I don't know. And are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice?
Joe, it's, I guess, a little bit of a deviation from the process, but before everybody says, sure, would it be appropriate for me to say a little bit? Joe had given me, I appreciated that he asked before I put my name forward. So I wasn't put on the spot. So I had a little time to think about what I'd do if I were chair, and if it would be appropriate, I can share that with folks. And if that's, saying I'm taking this a direction people don't want to go, I'd rather get that out in front first and have them pick someone else as a leader rather than get in a position where I'm trying to steer a boat somewhere it doesn't want to go. So I don't know if that deviation from the process is appropriate or not.
Actually, I think it'd be beneficial. And for those that are new to the task force that have just entered in April, it'd be maybe a nice time to get an introduction as well of you. And so if there's no objection amongst the task force members, we'll give Ms. Holthaus a couple of minutes. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Well, by way of introduction, I've been a Wildwood resident since as long as there's been a Wildwood, have been a resident of West County for 30 years, have a civil engineering degree by education, but gravitated my first job was in manufacturing. And from there, computers were this new thing. And I kind of gravitated to where engineering and manufacturing and education and computers came together. So have, a lot of sort of a jack of all trades, master of none background that may or may not be relevant to this particular task. Some of the things I'd like to do as chair, obviously with the agreement of the larger committee, but again, I think it's good to know where I'd try to be going before, people say, yeah, let's have Carol propose a whole bunch of things we're not in support of. I would propose that we disband all the subcommittees. I think they put a burden on the city staff, and I don't know that they've been particularly effective. I think the Richard Sturman model of a man with a mission or a woman with a mission, where we've got, an assignment for an individual and they're persistent about following through, will get us as far or further faster. And as I said, with a less overhead admin from city staff. I'd like to expand our focus to something that I think of as a little more balanced, where we're not losing focus on the critical location and the repairs that need to be done there, but also add the proactive components. We've got to start addressing the detention basins that aren't effective and deal with the stormwater before it gets into the creek with the stormwater master plan, and with longer term initiatives that would, reduce runoff at the source and involve the entire community. I think that for the critical locations, we need to agree to the top priorities and then really focus on finding enough funding to start the permitting process. I mean, as long as it's going to take to find the money, I think there's a long lead to getting permission, even if we had all the money in the world today. And I don't want to focus only on obtaining funding and then get the money and say, oh, now it's going to be another 2 years so we can do anything, because we haven't done what we need to do to get the wheels in motion from a permitting standpoint. And then I think we need to step back, and I think there's been some changes in the environment that make this particularly appropriate, but sort of step back from kind of a focus strictly on a parks and stormwater tax as a funding mechanism, and reevaluate whether there's a place for that, whether a bond issue would be as appropriate or more appropriate, whether there's CARES Act funding available, and maybe ask Richard if, with all the work he's done on grants, if now that we have some specific projects in mind, it's worth another pass through the grant proposal list. So I also, as a side note, there are some limitations to Zoom, but I also appreciate the flexibility it gives people. So I would advocate, if it's possible with city policy, that we continue to have at least some meetings via Zoom, even as the world opens back up. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about where I'd go with the committee. So if that means there's a flood of people coming in and raising their hands all of a sudden to nominate other people as chair, it will not hurt my feelings. I'm willing to serve as the chair, but I'm also very, very willing to continue to support this worthy effort as a committee member in whatever way people think I can be helpful. So
Thank you, Ms. Holthaus. Ms. Edens, you had your hand raised first.
Yes, generally, I don't think co-chairs are necessary, but you volunteered to do it and I appreciate it. But I would like to have a council member involved if you guys want I'd to
Ms. Edens, we didn't hear much of what you said. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Can you
Yeah, I
hear
was
me
gonna say
now?
maybe if you try turning off your camera, maybe that would help.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
Bueller. Okay. I appreciate Carol stepping forward and being interested and wanting to be chair. Generally, I don't think that the co-chair model is necessary, but I appreciate that you're willing to do it. I do think if we have a citizen involved, we definitely need a council person involved. So I'd like to amend the motion on the floor to make Joe Farmer co-chair with
Thank you.
Carol.
So does the maker of the motion-
Unless I would withdraw it if Carol doesn't want to be co-chair and then separately.
And
Are you okay with
Thank
that,
you,
Carol?
I'm okay with being co-chair. I had a conversation with Joe a little earlier. I think that 2 representatives from Ward 4 and the heavy level of work along Cox Creek could help contribute to a perception that, you know, it's kind of the Cox Creek's residents, you know, picking the pockets of the rest of Wildwood to fix our issues. So if Joe's the right person from a council person standpoint, then I think probably another community member would be a better pick.
I personally don't see a problem with you both being from the same ward as long as you lead with integrity and are inclusive of other wards, and you haven't demonstrated that you wouldn't be. But I'm not aware of another council member that's also willing to co-chair with a person. So I'll withdraw my motion and see what happens.
Thank you, Ms. Edens. Mr. Rambo, Dr. Rambo, excuse me.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I'm having internet trouble, and I was trying to get on for the last 20 minutes and just made it. So it looks as though I missed some stuff. I'm glad that we're still in the discussion about the chair person. I think I'm less concerned with losing momentum because we have plenty of inertia. But there are vector forces pushing us all over the map. And my greater concern is to make sure that we gain some focus out of this. And I further think that it's important that the leadership be someone in the Cox Creek watershed, because that's where all the work is going to happen. So I take the opposite approach that I just heard Ms. Holthouse say. I don't think that's a problem. That's really an education issue. The worst problems that we have all happen to be in Cox Creek, but the idea is to make it a holistic set of solutions, starting with the regulatory environment and letting people know, what they can and can't do in their own backyard. And we'll talk about that later with your other document. But what is the status? Can someone please tell me the status of the nominations right now?
The status of the nomination is Mr. Farmer made a motion to nominate Ms. Holthouse as chair of the Watershed Erosion Task Force.
Okay, and I heard that Ms. Eden may or may not have nominated Joe Farmer as co-chair, and if not, I think that makes some sense. I don't foresee any difficulties with a non-council person being chair of the committee, but there might be some unforeseen problems. And I think Joe has a different skill set that is complementary to Carol's. And so I would like to make a motion that that Joe Farmer be considered as co-chair.
Thank you, Dr. Rambo. The original motion on the floor is to nominate and appoint Ms. Holthouse as a chair. And if Mr. Farmer is then supported as a chair, we'll have co-chairs. So is there any further discussion on the first nomination relating to Ms. Holthouse? Then all those in favor, would you please say aye?
Aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any that abstain? The second nomination on the floor, which would create co-chairs, is to nominate Mr. Farmer as one of the chairs, now co-chairs. Is there any further discussion on that particular matter? Seeing none?
I guess I would just like to, again, express, my concern. I see it as a liability, the Ward 4 double hit as a liability, so there.
Duly noted, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Mr. Farmer first, Dr. Rambo.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've talked to Carol about this. I completely understand your concerns about the Ward 4 thing. I get it. I think that perhaps in the past there's been a lot of issues where, there's, an eye at doing one thing for one ward or not. I mean, in this case, specifically with this task force, I think it's been from the beginning that we've all been working on this thing together. And although, most of our kind of critical positions happen to be over in this direction, that's not to say that there aren't some stuff in other places. I mean, I think, I think Carol would do a great job. I agree with all of the ideas that she has and how I think, this would be the best way to move forward. I am certainly happy to help in whatever way I can. And I appreciate, Rob and Lauren nominating me. I'd be more than happy to serve. But the most important thing to me is just that we don't, lose the path that we're on. I think that, we've had a really good run here for the last, 2 or so years. And we're, kind of getting hopefully close to actually making some things happen, which is what I think we all really want. So I'm happy to do whatever works best. I'd be happy to be a co-chair. I'd be happy to just be me or whatever you guys need. I think we just got to get this thing running here as quick as we can.
So Dr. Rambo, you had your hand up again.
Yeah, we can skip it. That Joe covered it. I do think that this is a multi-decadal effort, and we don't need to get too concerned about who from which ward is leading the effort for this for the next couple of years. It's more important to just keep focus on what we really need to do, which will help all the wards. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion on the second nomination, which is for Mr. Farmer to be a co-chair in conjunction with Ms. Holthouse? Seeing none. All those in favor of Mr. Farmer becoming a chair or co-chair, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Joe, and it's not personal, but
I know.
Duly noted, Ms. Holthouse. Any abstentions?
I will abstain.
All right, thank you. Per the 2 votes that we've conducted, we now have co-chairs. Congratulations to Ms. Holthouse and Mr. Farmer. And before I relinquish the screen to you all, I would ask that, given Mr. Ridlin is here from the USGS, I would ask that the agenda be modified so that he could go first. And then thereafter, we could jump back to the agenda. I know that Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wagner may be thinking, well, why aren't we getting preferential treatment? Because we're paying them to be here tonight, and we're not paying Mr. Ridlin. So I would appreciate you considering that action. And ma'am and sir, it's all yours. Thank you.
So Joe, do we need a motion to change the order of the agenda, or can we just dive in?
First, we'll do the minutes if you don't mind, and then
Okay.
yes, a motion to amend the agenda and to let Mr. Ridlin get started. Thank you.
Carol, you want to take it away?
So we're approving the minutes. Do I have a motion to do that? The draft was submitted. Joe makes a move in. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. And all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Abstain.
All right, the minutes are approved as submitted. And now, so there's a motion to change the agenda. I propose that we do two things, that we move the USGS presentation up to next. And then after that, I would like to add an item to get an update from council member on where we stand with funding. You know, we'd kind of left it that we'd sent a recommendation to council and just where we stand with funding at the council level. So I would propose, ask for a motion to make those two agenda adjustments.
Carol, just real quick. Wait, real quick point of order. We can move the agenda, but are you talking about adding something new that wasn't 24 hours in advance? So I would check with Mr. Vunich and Mr. Cross, but usually when you add something new with the sunshine law, you need to post that ahead of time, but you can still have a discussion. But if you're looking for an action item, that could be an issue.
I'm just looking for information to be provided. I don't see.
Okay. That it's kind of built into this. Never mind. Okay.
If it's built into the other issues, I just would like to, you know, other discussion items, I think is an agenda item, but I think knowing where we're at with money before we start hearing from people about how to spend it might be helpful. So, but maybe I should turn the motions over to Joe. Maybe this is one of the many reasons why we want a council member.
No, I think you're doing good.
And don't worry, you can always discuss things under miscellaneous. That's why that word's there too.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always require a formal motion to do that. Yeah.
Okay. All righty.
So let's do this. First things first, why don't we have our, if there's nobody opposed, let's do our presentation. And then we'll move on from there. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Sure.
All righty. Mr. Vunich, do we need to make any introductions or do we just want to have our friends from the USGS take it away?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to extend my appreciation to Mr. Ridland for being here tonight and for being patient as we work through the chairpersonship of the task force. I would make point to note that Dan Ron, our assistant city engineer, was integral in engaging the USGS. And so I'm going to defer to him with your permission, Mr. Farmer, if you'd like to make any opening comments.
Absolutely.
And then finally, you have the proposal now with the cost components. We provided you the proposal without cost components at the last meeting and gave you approximately a month to review. And so hopefully tonight, a lot of this will sound familiar to you. And thank you.
Dan, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good evening. I don't have a lot to introduce, Paul, but we did ask, Paul's going to discuss tonight the proposal for data collection in Cox Creek. I think I'm just going to let Paul take it away because he will be able to explain this very well. So
Hopefully. Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks. And appreciate everyone and be able to share a little bit of this rather thick proposal. I think as I heard from the last meeting, we needed a cup of coffee to probably drink before we went through it and tried to digest it. I certainly understand that. I'm going to try to share my screen, so hopefully people can see the front slide. Are we good so far with that? Is that coming up by chance?
Yep, we're all good.
Very good. Okay, what I want to do is just try to go through that document and just a few slides here to be able to try to condense what it is that the USGS is interested in doing to help try to support some of the issues there within the city of Wildwood. A lot of this was based off of the last meeting that we had with input that came from folks on the task force. And we took that information and we have a team that had met thereafter with folks that we got in the weeds with, what kind of approach we felt was necessary to take that would provide the most optimal benefit for the community. And and so, as it says, we're trying to take a look at the hydrology of the system. Obviously, the storage component; those topics came up because those are kind of precursors to what we look at when everything ends up in the Cox Creek Channel, and we see what we've seen there in terms of erosion. So I will share that our director from our 3-state center, which again is Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa, was fairly excited about this effort. We do have some appropriations that we're able to contribute. We'll talk about that at the very end. But being able to cost share and be able to exercise those appropriations, there was some interest that came from our director on this because it was kind of a multifaceted effort in some different ways in terms of the science. And so that kind of thing sparks interest, in trying to open up the piggy bank a little bit, so to speak. So I'm going to try to flip through this and start things off. And if I'm getting where you can't hear me or something, please let me know. I've done a few of these, and sometimes we get into different snags. So one of the things that, or at least the first thing we have to look at is to do the data mining, and we have to acquire, the information that's already been out there. That's just kind of a preliminary understood task as part of this effort. And so since Dr. David Hammer's done quite a bit of work there, leaning on him with a lot of, the data that's been collected so far, or at least has been documented, is kind of first and foremost. I know that Dan has shared quite a few documents with us already. And again, we've absorbed quite a bit of this, but there's still more out there. And so certainly when we get into this, we've got to be able to review that and take it in and be able to use it to leverage, right? The LIDAR data is very fundamental. I think all of us know that, and I think all of us are fairly familiar with what LIDAR is. Right now, what's available is what we call a quality level 2, which is a 10 centimeter or less, kind of in the vertical root mean square error, gives you some idea of the uncertainty of the LIDAR data product. It was a 2017 acquisition. I see Jeff's on, so I think MSD had funded that at the time. We were hopeful that there'd be a fall acquisition here this year, but apparently we've understood that may not occur now. So using that LIDAR from 2017 is not a deal breaker for our analysis. And as I'll share in the data collection side of this, trying to capture additional detail using global navigation satellite system, GPS, or some of our other more terrestrial LIDAR type efforts, we'll be able to certainly fill in any of those gaps. As-built design infrastructure, getting some plans and information from the city is, some of these are just fundamental. Land cover, national land cover data set, soil surveys, imagery. And then when we move forward and start to look at future urbanization, then we have to kind of rely on planning and zoning, taking a look at projections and comprehensive land use plans. So these are things to come given this effort were to occur. The interesting thing we see within this watershed here at Cox Creek is that nice little square, at the downstream end, and that's a good thing. Having our gauge there with 25 years of record, and then we have some historic record beyond that we can use. And I'll talk more about that because when we want to start to analyze, the system, the watershed, and the basin response characteristics and so forth, a lot of that's contingent upon calibration and validation of that system, and that gauge will certainly provide some benefit in that regard. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we move on here to the forward into this discussion. On the data collection side, it's also the hydrology data that needs to be mined. So we talked about the gauge a little bit there with the 25 years of record, and it goes back beyond that. With a period of record in the 70s as well, and then that dips into the 80s, the early 80s, I think. Bonham Creek, there's a couple gauges there. Now, we're not really targeting Bonahon Creek so much, but precipitation data is pretty useful to take from those gauges. It's provisional data, and it's in our database. It's not out there, on the web, but it's certainly going to be used in these modeling efforts. And any supplemental hydrology or precip data that we can get from the National Weather Service and their Advanced Hydrologic Prediction System, we get out there to get boots on the ground, maybe to make flow measurements if that were to occur in the course of a 2-year study that we have here, or make use of the National Water Model. There is estimates that they have in terms of taking a look at even smaller tributaries. They're not necessarily that accurate, but they're things that we like to look at holistically when we're doing our own analysis. Another buzzword up here is the NexRad data that comes from the Weather Service, and being able to utilize that information anytime we look at anecdotal modeling, or we're going back trying to calibrate specific models. That's also useful. So just a real quick blurb on that. And of course, there's a lot more detail that I'm not sharing here that's in that document that's attached. One of the things that is not uncommon is to go ahead and deploy some sensors that we can put out within the basin to help give it a better idea in terms of response for this particular Cox Creek Basin. So as I mentioned earlier, going back a slide, we have that nice little white square up there that denotes our gauge, but throughout the Reach River on Cox Creek, we're also going to deploy 4 to 6 different types of submersible sensors to capture time series information that's going to be useful for the modeling. This information will not be telemetered. It'll be something essentially that we go out, collect it, bring it back, and we'll use it for the calibrations and validations of the models, and also just the overall investigation. But this is something that's in the proposal. There's different ways we do that. We put them in pipes that also have kind of a primitive type installation where it's just a glorified stick with a cork cap, or excuse me, a cork in the bottom of it that's able to go ahead and capture, the peak that comes through. But we also co-locate some of these submersible sensors, and these are not uncommon. They're been on the market for quite some time. We have a variety of names that we use. Continue with the data collection would also involve sediment sampling, and throughout the Reach, we're trying to target specific areas. Mostly those areas where we've seen the 17 priority areas that have been defined by Dr. Hammer, and or the 6 areas that were defined, I think, in the council memo that was out in November of last year. So those are going to be specific areas we'll be looking at just to grab sediment samples. And as you'll see, there's a reason we're doing this when we get into task 4 of this effort. Erosion pins are they're cheap, they're cost effective just to bring out, be able to put in the channel in terms of a monitoring scheme. And to be able to deploy those really doesn't take a whole lot of effort. So we are definitely going to co-locate those in a lot of areas at those 17 priority locations and or 6 that were identified within Cox Creek from that council memo throughout the Reach, and also other areas that aren't identified as priority areas. So again, this is still part of the data collection that all needs to be used for the analysis that we want to conduct here. So just trying to give an idea as to why that is. The lower right has a person out there with a GPS unit. Lack of a better word, it's just our explanation. It's going to be used to define some things that within the channel or infrastructure that the LiDAR data has not adequately done. For the most part, we're going to capture that. So that's some of the background there. One of the aspects of task 1 involves kind of a monitoring program that we're going to deploy or use terrestrial LiDAR units. This is not uncommon, and I think I gave a glimpse of this the last time we got together. The terrestrial LiDAR we use it in a lot of different ways. It's change detection. It's got a very fine resolution to it. We have several different units. Some that can really get out there and reach quite a bit or quite a distance, some that are a little bit closer. But the bottom line is that we want to go ahead and be able to provide scanning at least twice per year. Ideally, if we can do it before and after an event that occurs in the 2-year study, and if that doesn't happen, that's fine. We're still going to at least do 2 scans per year that are going to target the 17 priority areas, both channel banks and bed, just basically the perimeter that we can capture at those different locations. And again, just for reference, these locations, which I'm sure nobody can see very well, but they're essentially the yellow triangles and the red triangles. And so that's what we want to target with the terrestrial LiDAR, and being able to conduct those scans as a mechanism to do some monitoring. Now, it's a 2-year study, and the LiDAR is always really good information the way we use it this way, but that may want to go on into the future, and certainly that's something that can be done, of course. But at least 2 scans per year there. The tasks 2 and 3 get into kind of more of the meat of it when we're talking about hydrology and hydraulics. The way we want to evaluate the system is to look at the watershed, of course, first, and then see how that translates down to the hydraulics in the channel to find out, where the bad stuff occurs. What we want to do, of course, is leverage as much as we can leverage. And so part of that is just the data mining that we have identified in the first part through the data collection. But then the other piece here is the flood insurance study models that we have reviewed. We have them. We've taken a look at the Watershed model, HEC-HMS. We've taken a look at HEC-RAS. And we want to be able to use those models so we're not reinventing the wheel completely. I want to point out that it gives us a good leg up to be able to do that, but it's not, these aren't anything we take out of the box and they're turnkey and we're just ready to use them. There's some work that yet needs to be done to be able to update them, probably further calibrate. And I will say on task 3 and hydraulics, when we look at that particular model, it's in 1D, and we definitely want to go ahead and convert that to 2D. And when we do that, that's not the flip of a switch, so to speak. There's a little bit more involved to doing that to put that into 2D. That's 2 dimensions for being able to analyze what we want to analyze, and I'll talk in detail about that a little bit as well. So the big thing with the hydrology piece is we want to look at those basin response characteristics, which is peak volume and timing, and then we want to be able to tweak some knobs, and we want to be able to make some adjustments and some comparisons with that system. And that falls upon taking a look at a variety of design storms in terms of our inputs for boundary conditions and flow. Also the antecedent moisture condition, whether it's just, we're going to look at it as more of a normal average condition or one that's more wet. We're going to look at storage, and this is going to be more of a conceptual approach to be able to evaluate storage in the system, and then obviously the future development. And oftentimes, depending upon the reference you look at, that could be a 10 to 20 year projection in terms of what kind of development we're anticipating within the community or jurisdiction. And so we want to be able to absorb that. So these essentially what we're going to do with these models is to be able to do some simulations and take a look at these different parameters. So the table there kind of outlines some of this, but before we get into that table too much, I want to talk a little bit about the channel stressors that we've defined there. Kind of a fancy word to use for that is surrogates. We want to identify, something that gives a good idea as to how vulnerable this channel is in terms of susceptibility to instability. And the 3 buzzwords that pop out for us are velocity, shear stress, and stream power, which can all come out of the model, and certainly a lot better in a 2D model in terms of the hydraulics than a 1D model. And so when we translate some of the watershed work that we're doing and looking at storage and the basin response characteristics and evaluate and compare some of that and take it down into the channel to look at hydraulics, well, then we want to focus on these channel stressors, and we want to find out where they pop out, where are the hot spots at. And I've got a slide there to kind of talk a bit more there. Again, while I'll go ahead and, we're still trying to turn the knobs or provide the comparisons amongst the variety of design storms that we have here, antecedent moisture storage and future development. So, and I'm sure some of this is probably a little too technical, and I'm always at fault for doing some of that, but you know, hold my feet to the fire if there's some things there that I can try to describe a little better. But the objective 2, again, is the hydrology piece. This kind of gives a table. It's in the proposal. It identifies we're going to actually take a look at 2 different storm durations, a 6-hour and a 24-hour. Obviously, the 24-hour duration is more of a common analysis when we're taking a look at design storms. And pulling this information out, and as you can see here, for both existing urbanization and future, so there's quite a little bit of different types of comparisons or simulations we're going to be doing amongst those different variables. When we take that information down over here to hydraulics, task 3, we're looking at the channel stressors, velocity, shear stress, and stream power. We end up in this green table over here. And the same type of thing, only we're limiting things a bit more. We're only looking at the 24-hour duration, and we're taking, you know, our design storm recurrence intervals from 2, 5, 10, and 25-year recurrence. We're not going out to the 50 or the 100. So there's 2 reasons we're doing that. We're trying to optimize the analysis as to what are the most common occurrences that we've seen within the Cox Creek channel. You know, owing to the gauge that we've had there for 25 years of record, and even some historic record beyond that. These are what we look to optimize and to evaluate. The other end of it is when we go through all of this thing, we really want to try to keep our costs down and time associated with it and say, well, if we do the 50 or the 100, in addition to what we have in the little red box down here, you know, how much benefit is that going to provide in the overall analysis? So again, this is more of an optimal thing. We're trying to comprehensively bring in a lot of different analyses into the scope of work. You know, for the amount that, you know, essentially this is going to cost, and, you know, what we can gather in terms of our appropriations. So that's some of the reasoning there for that. These slides unfortunately aren't very visible, or they're very good, but when we take a look at a channel, for instance, what you're not going to be able to see is this color ramping here. We see these little red areas and details where we're starting to see things like shear stress pop up. And that's important. So shear stress, for instance, and velocity essentially are fundamental to erosion and evaluating what we call more of an allowable tractive force. It's used for design for permissible velocity or allowable shear. And with that, you know, it's not uncommon. Shear stress, for instance, is used when we have these erosion curves. And for different types of design, they're based on approximate shear stress limits for, let's say, riprap you're putting in there for the federal highways that have different diameters of riprap, or these parameters or these stressors or these surrogates, whatever you want to call them, have all got meaning. Whether you're going to take vegetation to that bank, you're going to look at riprap or gabions or some sort of articulated or fabric formed concrete, whatever the case may be, this is kind of fundamental to that. The other diagram down here is stream power. Very hard to see in this particular slide, but again, it's color ramping to identify the hot spots, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. Again, tweaking all these different comparisons and taking a look at future. So these are surrogates into the future. Stream power is also interesting, and it's used for a lot of different things. When we take a look at it from a modeling perspective, we're essentially taking the average velocities, which we're already capturing, and we're multiplying that by the average shear stress across the face of each one of these little grid cells that's in the model, so to speak. And there are several useful curves that comes from that. Matter of fact, some efforts that are out there actually categorize or classify different stability categories from the use of stream power. So a couple little erosion curves that I put up there, but the bottom line and the point is that all of these things have meaning, and there's a way that we can look and find out where that pops up and in a predictive sense. Now, the no-brainer would be, well, surely you're going to see some of this at the 17 priority locations already, and the answer is yes. But what we're also looking at is the order of magnitude that we see when we start to tweak these parameters, and what can we do to start putting more conceptual storage into the system to help mitigate some of that? Because I know that was of interest to the community. So that was one piece of it as well that we wanted to look at. So just a little bit there. The fourth task that we want to do is actually bring in more of a little bit more detail to take a look at failure planes. Now, this will only be for 4 of the previously identified locations of concern, but a bank stability and toe erosion model is not uncommon. We've used these in the past. Matter of fact, we've used other models that are, for something very similar to this. But essentially, we're taking the inputs of what we've done in the previous tasks and trying to translate that in to take a look at a predictive sense. What are we looking at in terms of the predicted eroded profile for the toe, and then a failure surface in reference to the bank stability. So these little red lines that we see here are of significance to us because at least for 4 of the locations, now we can draw some correlations from that in terms of running all of this information through some of those design flows and those different types of comparisons with task 2 and 3 with the hydrology and the hydraulics. And also, when we run this particular model, we have to have the sediment input as well. So there's a lot of sediment data that's going to be collected to be able to run this. So the way we look at this is now we comprehensively have taken everything into the system, I think, that we can look at to really give it a little bit more integrity and draw some better correlations from it. So BSTEM is one of these pieces as well. Finally, the piece that really gets handed over, just like any other study, USGS is a little bit different in terms of all the products that are out there are published. We have what we call a scientific investigations report. That includes all the interpretation and everything contained within it. And then the thing that the USGS did started doing about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe it's further back than that, is be able to release all the metadata. I mean, if anybody were to call one of our project hydrologists, engineers, or whatever, and get what they needed to get, they could do it all day long. But they go back into their archives and pull out model data or any kind of whatever it might be, polygon shape files, that sort of thing. Well, everything gets released in a data release. So any metadata that needs to be used from any of this study, analysis, whatever we have, will be out there embedded on the web for future mitigation design, whatever the case may be. The third bullet there under reporting is that each year it is our intent to go ahead and deliver the LiDAR monitoring differences as to what we're seeing at these locations. So when we do these scans, and again, 2 per year, ideally pre-post event, to get some change or effect as to what we're seeing. Now, granted, it's going to be limited to whatever type of flow event goes through there, and we'll have to obviously correlate and note that, but we want those deliverables to be annually. We don't want to wait to the end of the study, obviously, to wrap all that into a nice publication and hand it over. It usually takes a little bit to get that out, so we're going to be able to release that annually, of course. The other piece is a quality assurance plan. Won't spend any more time on this. There's just a lot of policies, memorandum, guidance, and you'll see that in the proposal. That's part of what we have to do. When we do execute these models, and I apologize for the techno speak here, but we have to calibrate and validate the models. I've given you some data collection in task 1 that's going to allow us to do that. We also commit to what we call sensitivity analysis on the models to take a look at goodness of fits or root mean square errors and some other buzzwords that help try to cinch these out so we have an idea of what the uncertainty is of what we've done. So that'll also be in this published SIR, Scientific Investigation Report. So that's part of it as well. And then the relevance and benefits, I know they're listed right there in the scope, but I want to just reiterate them. We're looking at the performance of the whole system, right? The watershed in and of itself, tying it back to the USGS gauge. We're looking at the sufficiency of storage in the system. And when we play with that, one of those knobs that we're going to turn and put in conceptual storage in there, then at that point we can make some comparisons, and especially when we're trying to contrast that between future development and what we have in terms of existing conditions. The channel stressors that I talked about, how we can bring up the hotspots, take a look at where those are going to reside, what's the magnitude of that as we change some of the different parameters and so forth there. And then the prediction of bank stability, as shared there at previously identified locations of concern. That's using the BSTEM tool. And then the monitoring piece with the terrestrial LiDAR. That's just going to be something that's going to be cooking along throughout the 2 years of this proposed study. So the final piece that just seems to take forever to be able to come back and get costs is laid out here in front of us. The timeline and budget is based on a signed agreement, October 1, 2021. That doesn't mean that it has to be executed there. It's just giving kind of a frame of reference as to how that works. It identifies, if we take a look at task 2A and task 3A, those are the pieces in there that we dot the I's and cross the T's on some of the modeling. But that's no matter what work we're going to do, we're going to end up doing that regardless. So I will say that this is back years ago, I think before my hair turned gray, that we were getting really close to a 50-50 match in terms of cost share. And since then, it's been very hard to achieve anything fairly close to that. We always try to shoot for the moon to get it, but it has been very challenging. I mentioned in the beginning, our director is very interested in this because it has different elements to it, and it has some scalability in terms of using some of these channel stressors or surrogates to be able to do some work with more at a national scale within the USGS. And so from that end, we were hovering around 30% in terms of our cost share, but we bumped this up, and she was able to, or at least it permitted nearly 40% on a cost share there. So the costs are what they are, as you can see. I will just share that when we take a look at these numbers for the USGS appropriations and the contribution, however this gets executed, if it gets executed, these numbers right here, we typically don't change or move around because they're appropriations. They have to be spent that year. But if we have a lag or we want to do different types of billing cycles or whatever the case is, that's completely fine. And this is the money we call reimbursable that would potentially come from the city of Wildwood. That money can be pushed year to year, moved around, pulled back, whatever we want to do. But these dollars down here, the USGS, that comes from some of our appropriations, and those are pretty well set, and we have to spend them. So that's just a piece of information, whether it's worthy or not, that I wanted to share. So hopefully I have conveyed everything there. I kind of gave the dime tour of that thick proposal, but certainly look forward to any questions that you all may have, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. That's good information to get, and I for one like seeing actual numbers that we can start to work with things on. So that's super helpful too. I appreciate it. This is probably a conversation for another day, but looking at the cost of these things, we work with a lot of different government entities on different road projects and things, and a roughly 50-50 split to get that kind of information to me seems like a pretty valuable tool. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sure. You got it.
Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions or anything? If not,
I think there's a lot of information there to digest. I'm wondering whether as a process, it might make sense to maybe give people a week to sort of feed their questions into either myself or Mr. Vunich is raising his hand. I won't fight you for that one for sure. Consolidate our questions and kind of get them to Paul and then have him determine whether responding in writing or putting them on the agenda for our next meeting might be the best way to get those questions answered.
Yeah, I just want to make mention that we're always sensitive. We can't go around and try to, we can always shoot for the moon and say, well, yeah, we're going to put the Cadillac in there. We're going to do these three-dimensional morphodynamic models, which to some of you, that sounds Greek. But, to do that type of analysis, we're looking really kind of at a cost benefit type of thing too for the communities, because we understand that, the funding is not going to be something that, we have a lot of to work with. So this was kind of I've mentioned again, it was kind of a best fit. And if there are parts and pieces that, that the committee looks at and says, I'd be more interested in this and we need to condense it down a little bit, then certainly we can go back and look at that and see what that might be. That would probably take, another conversation to be able to do that.
Great. All right. Well, we'll take some some time to kind of compile some questions. And one thing that just kind of jumps in my mind is always, logistically speaking, let's just say that we might go along with this plan just as proposed. If the kind of goal is to get this thing started here, I guess at some point maybe next year. How much lead time do you guys need to be able to kind of get this ball really rolling on things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Joe. Right now we're taking we put kind of a what if scenario together and said, well, if we were to execute this October 1st per se, then we had folks, the team that essentially, was behind this and getting in the weeds with some things, beyond what I shared, are ready to go in October. If it gets delayed another year, then we just adjust. And so the total lead time there is kind of hard to answer year to year, but I like that we got enough flexibility amongst our staff over 3 states that I would assume, within 6 months is probably fair to say, and that's just off the top of my head.
Okay.
Probably sooner than that, but it just, we like to have as much as we can, certainly planning all the different efforts and so forth that are going on. But our reach extends beyond 3 states at times as well, but we do have folks that are in-house, even though our house is 3 states, to be able to do it. So.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions or thoughts or anything, Mr. Vunich, you got anything?
Yes, Mr. Farmer, thank you. This is a question to Mr. Ridland. Since the project is to be co-funded, so to speak, from the city of Wildwood and the USGS, could we get an earlier start than the federal fiscal year if we started with city money first and then filled in thereafter with the USGS contribution?
Yeah, that's not an issue to be able to do that. That's a, we would start the agreement, the agreement start date is just all we'd have to change there to be able to reconcile that, Joe. So that wouldn't be any particular issue. We would just frame up the agreement in terms of its timeline and extend it such that those appropriations would kick in, that next FY, whenever that was. So yeah, it's not a problem.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think the next item back on the agenda then would be, I guess, a discussion of our critical location matrix.
Mr. Farmer,
yeah,
pardon my interruption.
Sure.
So to the task force members, if at all possible, could you get to Ms. Holthouse, Mr. Ron, and I any questions you have regarding the proposal that Mr. Ridland then could look at and respond to for our next meeting? So that would be June 2nd, excuse me. And then we'll forward them on. If you don't have any, that's fine. Dr. Hammer reviewed it. He had a few thoughts on some items, and I have a couple of questions, but please, if you have anything, if you could get it to us by end of business on June 2nd, then we'll package it all together, and the 3 of us will make sure we've covered everything and then get it out to Mr. Ridland. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so the priority location matrix.
And I'll give just a brief report also on the first community presentation, which was to the Timber Ridge Estates Homeowner Association last night. The presentation draft I shared a month ago made its debut in the community. I think it was pretty well received, but the proof will be in whether it drives subscriptions to the e-newsletter and participation after people smile and nod at the end of the talk. So if I encourage them to invite us to speak to other groups, and again, if there are any homeowner association meetings or groups, community groups getting together that you think would give us 5 or 10 minutes to just explain what the issues are and why they're of interest to everybody in the community. I'd look forward to finding opportunities to share that information. Moving on to the priority matrix. From there, I'm going to share my screen and go to, this is a Word document that was, are folks seeing the screen? I'll assume that you're looking at a Word document unless you say otherwise. This was also in the packet. So those of you that are having internet connection problems, you should be able to look at the document. So what we've done since the last time we looked at this is on page 1 of the priority matrix, and these are really the criteria. So, you know, we know that the priorities may change as conditions in the field change, but what we want to do is have something that makes our approach consistent and transparent and clear to people about if there are changes, why there are changes. So these first page is criteria that have to do kind of with what I call the degree of difficulty or feasibility. And, you know, clearly as we evaluate what projects we want to or can afford to take on, cost is a huge consideration that we have to put into our decision-making process. And so we've tried, and apologies, Joe and I went back and forth, you know, and had a couple of missteps. So Joe, I've done a little bit of massaging of the information you gave me, and it's all there, but maybe in some different places. So in terms of cost, and, you know, I think we've kind of gotten hung up on how can you make decisions before you have numbers, but how, you know, how can you get numbers before you have some priorities? And so really at the cost level initially, we're just trying to sort of put things into, you know, general sizes. Are we talking, you know, tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars? And you know, let's put them into kind of big buckets of general quantities, and then we can decide which ones we want to refine to more precise estimates. So cost is clearly one of the components we have to consider. Another, I think, is jurisdiction, and whether it's going to be easy to get work done because it's publicly owned land and the city has control of it, or whether it's going to get more complicated as we move to private lands or places where easements or land trusts or something need to be part of the process before we can implement a solution. So, and I've got here, and that speaks to the information discussion item. I was hoping we could move up on our agenda is, you know, as new funding sources in this case become available, you know, you can kind of highlight here's a change and say all of a sudden maybe we've got CARES Act money, or we've got, you know, the potential of a bond issue that would say, hey, we can be looking at, you know, things that fall in this hundreds of thousands of dollar category in 2022 or not. And the yellow highlights, not that this is factual data necessarily, but just that it would give us a way of saying, hey, here's something new. And again, how as conditions change, you could say, hey, we haven't really changed our approach. We haven't changed what we're, you know, what we're trying to do. We just have new conditions and new information, and we'll incorporate that into a structure that's consistent. So are there any questions about the criteria here on page 1? Joe, since you saw this, I think, for the first time, probably this morning, if you even had a chance to look at it then, I'd be particularly interested in any comments you would have.
Ms. Holtzhaus, I actually think it's consistent with what I provided to you late and behind schedule. And so I think it captures exactly what we wanted. So thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next couple of pages. Here we've tried to think of how do we take the critical locations and explain, you know, which they're all important. They all need work eventually, perhaps. But how do we explain to people why perhaps so many of those items are along Cox Creek right now? And that's our focus area, as opposed to, you know, something that someone may have reported in their backyard. So to try to take, you know, all this complex information and make it clear, the ultimate goal is to get to something that's kind of short and sweet and maybe color coded to give people a quick visual. And so we've taken different criteria and sort of put them into a summary category. And one is urgency. And so we've looked at, having a, sort of a safety. Is there a current threat or a potential liability? And these definitions have been something that have gone back and forth with Dr. Hammer. So he has inputted to these and reviewed them and agreed that they accurately reflect his criteria as an expert for how he would rank things. So a current threat to, or there's a potential liability is one thing we look at, and that has a the top category weight of a 5. Riparian conditions and bank materials kind of speak to how quickly conditions could change. And so again, Dr. Hammer has given us some ways of assessing conditions at any particular location. And then what we do is take, a location, would score them in each of these criterias using, the descriptions that are there. And then I'm flipping on to the, end of this document, which for you, but I'm going to go to an Excel spreadsheet. And did the Excel spreadsheet come across as well when I made the move? All right.
Yep.
So the idea here is we would take then the scores that we use the criteria to give, and those would sum up to, that category of our health and safety score based on danger, potential liability or danger to human safety, a health impact, an environmental impact, and a location would get a particular score. These numbers, by the way, are Carol's, examples that have been thrown in there. So that's why it says at the top in very big letters, draft concept example only. This is not, accurate. What our job is as a community, it is to say, these are the things that are important to us. And then we need to, let Dr. Hammer and the experts do the rankings of the sites in terms of riparian condition and bank soils and so on and so forth. And then, we get a red, yellow, green sort of summary that would say, this is a snapshot of all of the locations and how they stack up. So my first question, would be, am I making sense? Do you understand what we're up to? So let me maybe stop sharing the screen and look at faces for a few minutes of discussion. Any raised hands out there? Questions or comments?
I think it looks pretty good, Carol. That's a lot of information in a really concise format, and that's exactly what we need to have.
Okay. From there, my next question would be, if folks are willing to, if they, I don't know whether, based on the short amount of time you've had to review this document, you're ready to take action, or whether you'd like to postpone it. But I do think it is appropriate that the committee say, yeah, those are the things we're looking at, and those definitions make sense to us. So I don't know if anybody's willing to make a motion that we accept them at this point, or whether, would like a review process that would say we put that as an action item for next month.
I assume Mr. Vunich or Steve, I can't make motions to do that, right? As a co-chair?
You can make a motion.
Okay. Well, I think
I was told by John Young it's highly frowned upon by Robert's rules, but it is allowed. And I quote John Young.
Can we ask for a motion?
Is Mr. Roberts going to come frown on us? Because I don't really care.
We have had other chairs make motions on
Okay.
other committees, so it has been done.
I think, I know this is kind of, not everybody got a chance to really fully digest this stuff, but, I think the important thing for a lot of these things is, we're getting to the point now where we don't want to be falling victim, I think, to analysis paralysis. So I'm happy to make the motion. And if everybody disagrees that we don't want to do this yet, I'm happy to make the motion to kind of keep pushing this ball forward. And, we can move forward with, as soon as we kind of have a matrix to work on, we can actually start doing our stuff. So I'll be happy to make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Alex. All right.
Rob, you got your hand up.
I'm sorry, folks. I'm having trouble with my video part, and I can just barely hear the audio sometimes. So I think this is what I saw looks great, but I hate approving or finalizing a document without a chance to peruse it. Is there some way to accommodate that? Like, can we provide any input that we have in a week and just do it with email exchange to the group, or is that too cumbersome? I'm just looking for an opportunity to modify to some extent. If we approve it, subject to modifications until the next meeting or something like that, I'd be happy to make that, second that motion.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
So how do we modify that? Let's ask one of our procedural experts.
I think we might have lost. Oh, Joe, you're still here. So what do you think, Mr. Bunich? Is that a possibility or no?
Well, since you're the maker of the motion, if you would agree to the amendment as proposed and the second would concur, then that would be the motion on the floor.
So I'd be happy to agree with that. I think, Alex, you were the second. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Great.
And the only thing I'd like to amend then, if we're going to include that, caveat that's subject to modification, in addition to the description, that we've got the right criteria and the definitions make sense. I would like people to look at the weights as well. And, see that that part, that the definitions have gotten, a lot of input. There's been a lot of people involved. The weights are something that with some discussion, but with also a lot of autonomy, sort of threw in there, for example. So I would like to also challenge people to look at the weights, and I think it's not only possible, but likely there may be some modifications in that area.
Yeah, if I can jump in, that's what I was focused on. But could I ask you to please send what you feel is the cleanest, latest version of that document via email, so we all are singing from the same sheet of music, because there's a couple of minor, version changes out there, I think, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Can you do that?
Okay, and the latest one I think came out
this morning or
this morning. Yeah,
okay.
This morning.
Okay.
And it's also linked to the agenda, so you can go back.
Okay, so it's the one that's linked to the agenda. That's the latest one, and that's what we're talking about. Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so I assume we need a voice vote then, or? Yep. All right. All in favor of keeping this show moving forward here and going with this matrix with a few perhaps tweaks down the road? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Well, then we will move forward with our matrix. That's exciting.
Yep. My next question for that I went so far as to I understood Dr. Hammer was not going to be at the meeting tonight, so I went so far as to ask him if he thought having this scoring done for all 7. We've kind of been focused on scoring the critical locations. I asked Dr. Hammer if he was the one that was going to be going back to residents who had submitted locations, if scoring all of the locations would be, something good to have in his hand when he went to do that. And he said, yes, he thought that would be helpful to explain why we were working on what we were working on and why their particular project might not be something we're working on right now. And he thought that it would take probably a day to a day and a half of his time. So we're talking about maybe, I don't know, less than $500 for him to, if we think these are the right things to be looking at, to go through and score those critical locations. So I'd like to start a discussion on whether that's a good idea or not, to spend his time and the city's money that way.
Mr. Rambo, you got your hand up. Still.
Yeah, so we moved to the discussion of that topic because there's a separate document concerning that. I want to kind of speak at the right time. So maybe Mr. Bunich could enlighten us a little bit.
Dr.
Well,
Rambo?
I guess whether, well, maybe let me separate it from that. Do we think it's a good idea to score all 17 locations? And, you know, have it, Dr. Hammer, I guess, having it in his hand and going back to residents would be one of them. But, you know, the question is, should we score just critical locations, or should we take the time to, anytime a location is identified that somebody brings forward, should we put it through this process of evaluation?
Lauren, you got your hand up?
Yeah, sorry, I'm still having internet trouble, so I've got my video feed on and off. Appreciate it, Joe. Appreciate it, Carol. I'd say let's go ahead and have them score it. You know, when the residents took the time to fill out the forms, they anticipated someone probably coming to talk with them or following up, and it wouldn't hurt. So if Dr. Hammer is willing to do it and it's minimal money, I say do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think while our emphasis is on the critical locations, I think everybody knows that, you know, these problems are kind of persistent all over the place. So this will be a long process. Once the critical stuff gets fixed, we'll work on the other things. And who knows, while we're fixing those critical things, perhaps one of these other things will become one of those critical things. So I think that's a very worthwhile way to spend, you know, $500 if that's what it takes. Rob, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm stupid, but my question kind of still stands. I'm wondering, you know, Hammer has volunteered to do this for a mere pittance. And he was thinking he was just going to, you know, make phone calls to all the residents. He's happy to do that. Are we asking for him to do the scoring then, or how is that going to work? And are we supposed to talk about the other aspect of that, which is the retention basin review? And I think that's a question for Joe Vunich.
And I think those are related questions, but, you know, maybe if we can take action on this one, get a motion and take action on scoring all 17 and then move on to the next
Yeah,
item.
but who's going to score them?
Dr. Hammer.
As part of his conversation with the residents?
Well, he's going to score them because a lot of the things, you know, riparian condition, for example, it takes an expert to say this bank is less stable than some other bank. So I think he's the right person to say, here's how the conditions at this site fit against these criteria. So I think that it's right for the committee to say, hey, here's the things that are important to us. But I think it's, you know, got to be an expert that scores, here's how the locations stack up against those criteria. So I'm asking, you know, the committee to authorize Dr. Hammer to look at all 17 plus 6. I don't know. I'm not sure whether those 6 from the one date were in addition to or a subset of the 17, but basically that as a resident or a consultant or somebody brings forward a location that says, hey, I think we ought to be looking at this, that we put it through that process of saying, hey, we looked at it, used the same scorecard we did for every other location, and out of that process came these priorities of what we're working on. So is there a motion to engage Dr. for whether he uses it to talk to residents or not? And I think that's a good idea that we'll get to in a minute, but just, do we think it's important to score all locations is the question. And if you think the answer to that is yes, then let's, you know,
Let's
look for a motion to have, you know, engage Dr. Hammer for a very nominal amount of money. I think it's less than $500 to score the 17 locations and have that as an input to our efforts.
I believe Councilmember Edens was basically making that motion. Is that correct, Lauren? Maybe.
Or she can't, or she's,
or maybe she can't.
Again.
Can you hear me?
Now we
Can you hear
can.
me?
Yep.
I keep freezing. Yeah, sure. I'll make the motion.
All right.
All right. So while I'm happy to make Mr. Roberts and his rules upset, is there anybody else in the group that would like to second that idea?
I'll second it.
All right. Mr. Sturman is ready to go. Any discussion, Rob? Is that a second, or you have more you wanted to elaborate on?
Yeah, I was going to second it, but I am in favor of engaging Dr. Hammer to the maximum extent possible. I was going to discuss this in the, when we talked about Joe's proposal for just that, but I'm concerned that he represents a ton of knowledge that could, walk away. He's retired at his age and so forth. I'm not, I don't think he has one foot in the grave by any means, but I really think we need to get him focused as quickly as possible on the strategic issues that face us as a community, the ordinance review and so forth, and just sort of the path that we're supposed to follow for the next 2 or 3 decades as we correct these issues. And so anything we can do to engage him is a great thing, but I think we need to talk about a more strategic use of Dr. Hammer's time after we get these couple of little components figured out, which is the retention basins and the prioritization. So I'm in favor of having him do the prioritization because I think it makes sense. I think he can incorporate that with his homeowner visits and kill 2 birds with 1 stone and get us rolling. But I don't think the Hammer effort should stop there. I think we need to engage him a bit more fully than we're contemplating right now. So that's my spiel.
Okay, so let's take the issue at hand right now. We've got a first and a second. Everybody in favor of having Dr. Hammer kind of handle this scoring system? And everybody, whoever's in favor, let's say yes.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? I heard a dog, but they don't get a vote. Any abstentions? All right, so that we're moving forward with. And now I think, I guess, Mr. Vunish, I saw your hand up a moment ago. I think this kind of leads into perhaps what Councilmember Rambo was talking about in terms of detention basins and things. Is that what you wanted to talk about or something else?
Actually, if I could go back to the document for just a minute.
Sure.
Actually, the Word document, not Excel here. If we go beyond the couple of pages that are color coded right now, pages 2 and 3, I've taken a very rough cut at trying to use these same sort of summary categories: urgency, health and safety, and impact, and started thinking about how we might also be able to apply a similar process. I mean, the criteria would be at the subcategory, the things that add up to urgency level would be different, but that we could use a similar process for detention basins and, floodplain connection and things that would do a better job of retaining stormwater. When I talked to Dr. Hammer, he did not think that was something that was necessarily in his sweet spot of expertise. So I think in the interest of time, I'll table it for tonight in terms of digging into any specifics or making any recommendations, but just plant the seed that I think this idea of, looking at how difficult is it going to be because of cost and jurisdiction, and how can we, objectively decide what's most important to work on in a way that is transparent, in a way that's clear and comprehensive, but also within a framework that lets us respond to changing conditions. So I'm hoping that what we've been able to do with the critical locations, we can also mimic as a process down the road with both, what I call the basins and borders, the stormwater management, the, detention basins, and then ultimately also with maybe community-wide efforts to reduce runoff at the source by retaining the water there. So that's all I will say in summary. We've got, I think, some good work with the first area, and I hope it's work we can build on as we move to a more balanced and broader perspective on what we need to do.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's good stuff.
Stop sharing my screen and turn it back to you.
Mr. Vunish, do you have anything to add?
No, sir, not on that particular item. I was waiting for the next agenda item just to do an introduction.
I believe we have arrived at the next agenda item. Let's do the introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the task force, as you know, when the process began, we spent a great deal of time engaging our residents to identify locations that they were familiar with that from their perspective was a risk, a threat, or under duress due to erosion or other natural causes. We received a wonderful response, and that response has been categorized, placed on a worksheet, and ultimately approved for submittal to the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District so they could actually look at them, score them, and ultimately, hopefully, fund some of them when funding becomes available. The one thing that the city, in this particular case, the Department of Planning and Parks, has not been able to do is to follow up with those residents, property owners that did provide information, and at least let them know where we are in terms of the current status, and maybe respond to any questions, comments, or concerns they have. Dr. Rambo, I believe, had a conversation with Dr. Hammer, and collectively they thought that there was an approach that would be inexpensive to do and could be done in a fairly quick manner. And with the permission of the co-chairs, I'll let Dr. Rambo kind of take it from there, if that's okay.
That is fine with me.
Well, that's kind of it. I mean, his cost estimate has not materially changed. He says he just kind of threw out that number saying if cost was a factor, then he would do it for X amount. And so he's doing it really in his bargain basement. And but he does think that he can get it done at about the $500 figure, 10 minutes a call times 6 calls times X number of hours, however it works out. And the retention basins, though, may be a little bit more effort at this time of year than they would have been in the November timeframe or whatever it was last year, because now you have to fight, ticks the size of small dogs and hack your way through honeysuckle just to get to some of these sites. And so the cost may go up slightly because it's going to be based on his actual hours. Of course, we trust him to track those, but it might be a $3,000 bill, but I think that's money very well spent. And getting a handle on these retention basins is critical for us as we go forward. But again, this is where I want to emphasize that I think Hammer has lots of expertise that we need to more fully engage. And I think that decision may come from the WETF. It may just be money that Joe has in reserve or something that we should, as a committee, decide to spend for him. But this stuff needs to happen. And meanwhile, Hammer is just sitting there ready to go, but no one has pulled the trigger on it. So I think this expenditure makes eminent sense. I'm going to move that we do what Joe suggests, with the caveat that it may cost a little bit more. But I'd also like to maybe afterwards have a discussion about what other efforts we would like Hammer to focus on next. So right now I'm making the motion that we approve Joe's proposal and build in a fudge factor.
That sounded like a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Sturman seconds. Joe, do we need to have like a specific number of fudge range, or are you good with just an amount that we can fudge?
No, sir. What I'd like to do is get a more formal proposal from Dr. Hammer, but based upon the direction of the task force, if the motion's approved tonight. And then under a certain amount of funding, Mr. Cross can approve it, and that's what we'll do.
Great. Okay. All those who approve of said motion, say aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Or any abstentions? All righty. Well, that's good. Rob, are you abstaining? Or?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being a pain here, but I'm wondering, is this the appropriate time to talk about moving forward with other tasks for Dr. Hammer, or should we wait till miscellaneous, or how do you want to do that?
I think we've still got a little bit of a presentation left to go here, so let's try to get through that, and then we can approach that. I mean, so far, I think that everybody is pretty much in agreement. It seems that we need to maximize Dr. Hammer as much as possible, so we can certainly discuss it. But
that's the point.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you.
Let's perhaps get our next little conversation going here on the design considerations. Is that where we're at? I think, is that right? I believe so, since we moved some stuff around, right? Okay. Design considerations from Wilson Hydro. Mr. Wilson, I believe you are up. Or Mr. Vunich, if you want to do some intros, it's up to you, sir.
Well, that's fine, sir. I was just going to do introductions. Todd Wagner, Joe Wilson. They are a team. They're working together to identify costs for the 6 priority locations. And I'll turn.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. Some of you I got to meet at the November meeting. I may have had a mask on part of the time, so now you get to see the mustache. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. We've had a very interesting project. A little bit of my background. I've spent the last 30 plus years working exclusively in hydrology and hydraulics, primarily urban hydrology. Served as an expert witness for over a dozen different cases involving hydrology and hydraulics. And when I first graduated from college and got to working, I called my mom and told her I get paid to play in the rain now. So that's my perspective for my design. I'll let Mr. Wagner fill you in a little bit on his interesting background.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. And thank you, Task Force, for allowing us to speak with you tonight. My background is I have just over 30 years of experience in consulting and working for the city of Springfield as a stormwater engineer and also at city utilities in environmental compliance. And I've just started a consulting company after retiring just this year. And through the years, done numerous master planning efforts, capital improvement efforts. We had quite a bit of flooding back in the early 90s in Springfield, and over about a 20-year period, we were able to spend nearly $100 million on literally hundreds of capital improvements projects, and that's something looking back now. It's I'm very, very fortunate to be able to have been involved in that, but that gives you a little bit of my background. And Joe and I have both spent a lot of time evaluating floodplains and detention basins and all the things that we've been talking about here. So this is a really fun project for us to work on. So thank you. I'll let Joe take it.
Okay, I'm going to give you just kind of a quick overview of our conceptual evaluation, and see if I can get this screen to share. Are you seeing the title slide for the presentation? Okay, thank you, Joe. This is part one of a study that we were engaged to assist the city of Wildwood in. there's some additional tasks that we'll complete by the June meeting. Talk a little bit about that later on. First of all, I really want to see if I can get my, there we go. I really want to thank Joe's staff and Joe, Travis Newberry, Rick Brown, and Dan Ron in Public Works for their assistance in collecting and organizing our multiple requests for data. Without their assistance, we couldn't have pulled this off in the short time frame that we did. Also, like to thank Jeff Ruppy with MSD, likewise for processing data requests, and Dr. Hammer for being a very valuable resource. I'm sure there are other folks on the city staff that I owe a great deal of thanks to for getting out and digging a lot of this information out. And unfortunately, I don't know everyone's name, so I apologize if someone put a lot of effort in this and is left out. We were tasked in putting together some conceptual designs and costs for some priority areas where we're seeing some really serious bank instability. I first visited some of these sites in November, and coming back and looking at them again in April, it is amazing how much the banks have moved in some of the places. One of them we're going to look at, there's been probably more than 10 to 12 feet of bank loss just in that short time frame. So got some serious problems. There are multiple problems, and one of the first steps in this process is understanding how big of an elephant you have to eat here. We got to know what the scope is, what the price is. So that's where we came into play here, is trying to put this together. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary of the report. If you want more details, we can dig as deep as you want. Do not hesitate to ask questions as we go along. And Todd, if I leave something out, which invariably I will, appreciate you filling in the gaps for me. Yeah, we're gonna look at the first 6 sites that we were tasked with. Before we get to looking at the specific sites, I want to talk a little bit about some of our assumptions and limitations here. These conceptual designs cost estimates were based on a field visit and standard engineering practices. We didn't do any surveying. We haven't done the hydraulic modeling. These are conceptual level designs only. The existing Lidar that we worked with, as Paul Ridland previously mentioned, done in 2017. It's already seriously out of date in some places. There are significant discrepancies between what's on the ground and what's on the Lidar, so keep that in mind. The unit prices are from general engineering knowledge and similar projects, and these vary greatly when you're talking about moving sometimes just a short distance from site to site. The other thing that is a big unknown right now is construction costs and material costs have gone through the roof in the last 6 months. Where that's going to level off, we really don't know. So again, these are conceptual level designs and cost analysis. We did not try to include legal costs for acquisition of easement or condemnation of easements. Fortunately, most of these first projects, I think all except 4 out of the 6, are on city property. So that's a plus. We focused most of our efforts on standard engineering techniques, recognizing that when we get into the detailed design, people will be looking more into bioengineering techniques, more green techniques where they're appropriate. But again, those are so site specific that we based our designs primarily on standard engineering techniques with some allowance for some bioengineering. Okay, so here's our locations of interest. I've got the city limits of Wildwood shown, the various watersheds within the city. We're focusing primarily on Bonham Creek and Cox Creek. The first project of interest is a triple meander that's located behind the Elegant Child Early Learning Center near Clayton Road and Strecker Road. The second is also there at the Elegant Child Detention area, which is right in the same location. Our third location is down on Evergreen Court. It's a tributary in the upper end of Cox Creek. Then we'll move down to the Highlands at Wild Horse. That's also on Cox Creek. Then back upstream to Wildwood Meadows and end up with talking about the community park. So our first site here at the first two sites, Triple Meander and the Elegant Child Detention. This is the stream section looking upstream right behind the Elegant Child Learning Center. If you look at, bear with me here while I get my highlighter going here, or a laser. If you look at this area right here, that is a breach in the detention basin located behind the Elegant Child Learning Center. So in November, this had not breached. So between November and April, this bank's moved at least 10 or 12 feet back, completely breached the berm for this detention basin. But on this, as you can see, this triple meander, this is the upstreammost meander, sharp bend, massive deposition of gravel components, cobbles and such. And as a side note, Mr. Vunich did not give me a time limit. We'll see if he makes that same mistake the next time we're invited to talk. No, I intend to keep it as brief as possible here, folks. Okay, so here's a plan view. The Elegant Child Learning Center sits back on the hill right here at the lower right. We've got 4 meanders. We're interested in 3 of them. This meander was the site of a previous stormwater project, stabilization along Strecker Road, that is functioning quite well. It's vegetated. There's a little bit of area where there's some unraveling, but it's performed quite well. So what we're looking at here is the stippled areas are revetments, rock revetments, and probably be combined with some willow stakings as well to vegetate it. Basically what we're trying to do is move the thalweg, or the low point of the channel, out away from the toe of this steep embankment that's located along here, move it back out toward the middle of the stream. And to do that, working with the revetments, we're working with some potentially some rock barbs, bendway weirs to direct that flow back away from the toe of the embankment. Now, one of the things that is extremely critical on any type of stream stabilization is grade control on the main channel. Anytime you're changing the alignment, you're shuffling with the stream, you're changing the gradient, basically changing the rise over the run, the elevation difference over the length. So if you don't go in with grade control, you're setting yourself up for failure. So we're proposing a grade control at the upstream end, flows going from the bottom of the screen up toward the top of the screen. We've got several tributaries that have turned out that they seem to be a major source of the larger cobbles that are present in the stream. So we've got a couple of tributaries coming in that will require grade control at those locations. We've got revetment around the long bend here, tying in to the upper end of the original Strecker Road project. And then the fourth bend, or the third one that we'll be working with, extends past this major tributary. We'll have grade control on the stream to prevent head cutting within the tributary, and a grade control at the downstream limits of the project. So what does this, when we're talking about these revetments, what does, most important part here, estimated cost on this project's right at 2.8 million. As you'll soon come to realize, these types of projects are not cheap. They're also a long-term program. You're never one and done when it comes to stream stability. You're always going to have maintenance issues. You're going to have things that come up with it. So when we're talking about these channel sections, let's look at a cross section. If we slice across the stream, kind of the conceptual approach to this is basically we're placing the revetment, which is this area here, backfilling in behind, moving that bank out, and then excavating the channel to relocate the thalweg. And this material that's excavated can be used as part of the backfill behind. We're going to size the channels. These channels are typically, what's done is sizing the channels based on what the channel forming flow is, which is somewhere between a 1 to 2.5 year recurrence interval storm event, and place the upper limit of our revetment at somewhere around a 5 or a 10 year water surface elevation, so that it's protecting the bank from the most frequent events, and then tie in to prevent it from unraveling during higher stream flows. Todd, you have any additions or comments?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well. Be interested to know if anybody's got one. I saw one question there, but if anybody's got a question at this point, is there any? Is it clear what's being proposed here?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
What is the material of the revetment? What is that? What is that?
That's going to be large diameter rock. It's riprap.
So that's rock embedded in the bank at a very steep location, and that's it. Certain size rocks or boulders, small boulders, and that's it then. Because up to now, and I'm from a construction background, except building construction, but in the past, I've seen many times shown over and over, I think to include Dr. Hammer, that what was felt was going to be required in our situation, both banks need to be laid back to what was called an angle of repose. And then on the banks would be placed certain sized boulders, small boulders. They would be spaced apart enough, and in between them, where the soil is exposed, would be vegetation would begun and to grow. And that would be on both banks. And then I think, I'm not sure about the bed itself, but it would consist of also boulders and maybe also vegetation. I'm not real sure about that anymore. I've kind of gone cold on that.
Well,
and I've heard, so anyway, there you go. So this is extremely different. And I frankly, I'm not a creek expert by any means, but to have those boulders placed at that angle, I just can't imagine they're going to remain past the first heavy rain.
Yeah, I guess I need to explain that the vertical scale is exaggerated on these on the revetments. It's not as steep. The vertical scale is greater than the horizontal scale. Otherwise, you wind up with an almost flat line across when you put it at a drawing scale. So this is going to be laid back at about a 1.75 to 1, maybe a 2 to 1 angle, which is well below the angle of repose for riprap. And the rock would be sized such that, and again, I appreciate your comment on the vegetation is part of what I mentioned earlier when we when a person gets into final design on this thing, based on the specific site and what they're working with, that bioengineering techniques would be applied, including vegetation in layers intermingled within the rock. So, but yeah, this is it's a standard engineering practice, and I apologize for not explaining that when we got started. But this is it looks steeper in the cross section than it really would be.
Yeah, those slopes would be laid back quite a bit from what you see out there today.
Okay.
And also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
Also, there are other places on other projects where, and Joe will show this, where we will show stabilization on both sides. In this case, although it's hard to tell in a cross section, this is on a sharp bend, so that when the stream is turning, you have natural deposition on the inside of the bend, and you won't have erosion on the inside of the bend. Your erosion is on the outer side of the bend, where you see the lines close together, where you see that brown gets real dark. Those are a lot of contour lines close together where the bank is near vertical, and that's where the stabilization bio techniques stabilization will go in on those steep banks. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. I'm sorry. Then your estimate. So then you based your estimate on this system as you show it, except with the horizontal ratio or scale changed. But you based your estimate on this system. And is that on historical data? It's a conceptual estimate, or what's sometimes called a budget estimate. Do you go back to historical data? Is that what your numbers are based on?
Yes.
Except that, and am I right? You're only doing it on one side for this system?
And this is just a typical section. When we go back, let me back up here. On these sharp bends, we would just be on one side of the channel, as
Just one side
pointed out.
And you think that will suffice with a raging torrent going through there? You feel that the one side will do it?
Yes, sir. That's what was done here along the Stricker road improvement.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And this is just a point bar that continues to form, and that's what we're having happen here, is as this stream migrates, where at some point in the past that stream was probably right in through here, and as it deposits material on the inside of that bend, because the velocity on the inside of the bend is much lower than on the outside, then that channel just keeps creeping out.
What did you base your estimate on historical data for this basic type of system, or
Todd, do you want to talk?
I was going to ask that, and then also from your experience, what sort of error percentages do you usually experience with your estimating? And I know this is a changing target with these banks eroding. We don't know what nature's going to bring us in terms of downpours and things, but is that just strictly from historical data? Mostly?
Yeah, it's broken down into a number of line items that are quantities. So first we estimate quantities and then estimate unit costs to come up with total cost for each line item.
I understand, and I'm an estimator, a lot of estimating. I realize that, but what are your unit costs based on?
And those unit costs are based on a variety of research from similar projects, from standard costs for rock that comes from quarries, and that can vary quite a bit depending on where you're located in relation to a quarry. You asked about the error. At this early conceptual level, we've applied 30% contingency because there's a lot of variables here that we're making, like Joe said at the beginning, we're making a lot of assumptions on things that we just don't know yet at this point, but we're doing the best we can with just general engineering practice and using those assumptions to come up with unit costs and quantities for what we would expect to see here.
Yeah, because I'm thinking more than materials, the worst cost is going to be in labor and equipment and access. Some of these areas, I've mapped that area. I did the mapping from Cox Creek from down where it's underneath Clayton, where Clayton Road goes into Point Clayton subdivision up to Strecker. And so I've seen that area, and the access, the difficulty in access is terrible. And so when I think of labor and equipment and access, it's probably going to dwarf to a fair amount of materials cost. Excuse me.
You're right. That's exactly right.
That's good stuff, Mr. Sturman. Ms. Edens, I see you had your hand up for a minute there.
Yes, thank you for the presentation and for being with us. I just had a quick couple of questions. One specifically on the Highlands. I had spoken with Director Vunich just right before the meeting and expressed that I would be talking to the HOA on Saturday about their issues. But it's just to give you an update. It's my understanding that after multiple times of reporting to MSD that those major trunk lines that I'm sure you saw were exposed, where all the rock shifted down, that MSD will finally address the covering of their lines. So that's pretty good. But can you, because the way it's worded has created some confusion kind of with the titling. So the common grounds is in the field, but HOA does not own the creek. It's not private property, it's public. And the HOA was not specifically asking for changes to be made on their property. They're willing to assume those costs themselves. So just are the changes in the proposal, because I'm having trouble seeing stuff on internet tonight, that will protect the Strecker Road Bridge downstream, correct? And then the area where it was cutting in towards Strecker Road that I saw with Dr. Hammer. So I just wanted, my understanding is that the proposal that you have now for the $500,000 is entirely in the creek bed and not on the common grounds. Is that correct?
I can't say for sure. It looks like that there will be some access required through the common ground.
Absolutely. Okay.
This is the area that we're talking about. This is the common ground, the green
right,
area.
But okay,
and when we look at let me go to the plan view.
Okay.
Okay, so really what we're looking at is grade control through this tributary that comes in from I'm drawing a blank on the road over here, but grade control here, revetment and moving that thalweg out. This is a deposition area where the gravel's been deposited from it breaking through that. There's an existing berm along the top of the bank here that when we look at where it's breached, you can see this is actually a berm on either side and where this is breached, so that the material is depositing out in the field. So one of the things that we included in part of our estimate was to remove this deposition from the field. So
okay.
If from looking at the parcel data from St. Louis County, this area and this area are both owned by the property owners association.
Okay, so as we get closer, then maybe I can touch base with you guys later for the repair that would take place on the common ground for them to do some sort of assessment on that, in addition to the work that we would do in that public area.
Sure, we can talk about that in greater detail.
Absolutely.
While we're here at this one, again, what we're looking at on the Highlands of Wild Horse is grade control on this tributary. We got grade control on the main channel. Again, on the outside of this sharp bend that parallels Strecker Road and grade controlled at the downstream end. Now, in looking at these projects, we had to draw a line as far as where we were going on each of the projects, because conceptually, you could go a lot further. There's some additional alignment issues going into the bridge under Strecker Road that will need to be addressed at some point. We did not include that in this particular project. We've done that, put this together under a really tight time frame of right at 3 weeks. So even though we noted that there were areas that are just as bad as the areas, or in some cases maybe even worse than the areas that we were tasked with, we tried to keep our scope within what the original request was. And this particular project, as Eden previously mentioned, is estimated about $550,000 for the revetments and grade controls and removing the deposition from the common ground. And we did include some rough estimates for easement acquisition to get onto the common ground. So we'll see how that all pans out.
Okay.
Any questions on this one?
I have two follow-up questions. The reason why I brought it up is we've just been very consistent as a city about how we do and we don't spend money on private property. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then I did have a question on the meadows. I think I cut out. Have we already talked about that?
No.
Okay, I'll hold my horse then. Sorry,
Need to back
appreciate
up a
it.
couple and then we'll get to that. Yeah,
Okay.
the intent was to minimize any impacts outside the stream bank. And in order to do an appropriate tie-in so that you're not leaving one end of your improvement exposed, it may require some work actually on private property. It's not, it can't all be contained to within the creek because you've got to be able to tie into the banks. So I understand your comment about the removing the deposition in the common area. So that may not be practical as part of this project. Okay.
Carol, did you have something you wanted to add?
It's about the triple meander. I don't know if it's helpful to jump back to that now or whether we want to kind of stay with one location. So
yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking we're kind of butting up against the 2 hour, a little past 2 hours here on this thing. We may want to revisit a few of these or the rest of these perhaps here in June, and that gives us all a kind of a little, opportunity now that we, are seeing this stuff. That might be good.
The other thing I might suggest is that we use that same process of, if people already know they have questions about the material that's been presented, maybe take the next week to go through it, get your questions, to Mr.
Sure.
Bunich, and the co-chairs, and we'll consolidate those so that we can not only go over the other locations, but also the responses to questions at our next meeting. That makes sense as a process. I think maybe that could. The question I had though was maybe a little bit relevant to kind of the general direction. As I understood it, the triple meander was the only one that you thought would probably require the U.S. Corps of Engineers to get involved in permitting. Do I have that right?
No, all of these projects would require Corps of Engineers for permitting. And typically on these types of projects, it's not likely that anything's going to be denied. It's just that you've got to provide the paperwork for them to approve it. And it is time involved in trying to get the project off the ground. So typically these projects would not likely qualify for a nationwide permit. which means they would have to go out for an individual permit, which means a public hearing and a comment period. So it could add, or when you're working on the project, you've got to allow for probably close to 6 months to get that Corps of Engineers permit.
Okay. And is the engineering you've done to date sufficient to start that process, or are more detailed designs required?
Maybe, I guess, is the best answer I can give you. I've worked on projects where the design sketches were on the back of an envelope, literally, and that was close enough for what they were concerned with. On something like this, I suspect they're going to want to see a little more detailed plans, but I can't say for certain.
Okay. And you said typical would be about a 6-month process for getting through.
If it's going to a
those
public
approvals?
hearing, yes, it'll take about 6 months.
Okay.
Mr. Berger, you had your hand up.
Sorry, I did some searching while I had my hand up and answered my own question.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I do think, I think it's a good time maybe to wrap it up, and we can compile our questions and get them over to Mr. Vunich here as we go. I think that, getting a little bit of a walkthrough on this is super helpful in understanding kind of the thought process. As I know everybody is, myself included, tired and our brains are full of Watershed things. I think if there's nothing else, I think we can probably postpone the rest of the agenda to next month. I think that, we'll maybe look at, Carol and I can discuss the subcommittees and how we want to do that and all that kind of stuff. So I think at this point, it would be appropriate, unless anybody has an objection, to look for a motion to adjourn for the evening. Anybody want to make that?
I'll make that motion.
All righty. I guess we need a second on that one. Going once.
Seconded.
Perfect. I don't think that's debatable. So I think we just vote in favor and we're done, right? Let's do it. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Of adjourning the meeting? Excellent. We will see all you guys next week. Good stuff. Thank you so much.
Congratulations,
Next
Mr.
week.
Farmer and Ms. Holdhouse.
Yeah, same here.
I don't know. Congratulations, condolences. I'm not sure. Time will tell.
We'll get it
I think
sorted out.
We got some great leadership, I think.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.